I watched the barometer fall and wrote my caution in careful words. The schedule stayed louder than my report, and the boats went down into the wrong sea. When the waves broke the lines and salt drowned the radios, my numbers became bodies and lost gear. I stood under charts and signals, hearing the surf turn orders into drift. 9th of July 1943, Central Mediterranean. Allied convoys move east in darkness, closing the southern coast of Sicily. The operation has a name on paper and a schedule on every staff table. The goal is simple to state and difficult to execute. Put infantry and armour ashore before dawn. Open the way to Italy. Keep the initiative moving. On the larger ships, the decks are steady enough for routine. On the smaller craft, routine is already being replaced by caution. The sea is not yet violent, but it is no longer calm. A wind that was expected to ease has held its strength, and the direction is wrong for the long, low boats that must do the last miles. In the amphibious force, the weather section is not large. It is a handful of men, instruments and paper. They work below the bridge, near charts, signal logs, and the quiet hum of radios. Their job is to reduce uncertainty, not to promise safety, not to create confidence, to measure what can be measured, and to warn when conditions are turning against small craft. The weather officer on duty that night is not a famous commander. He is not the one whose name will be remembered in speeches. He is an officer trained to read the sky through numbers, barometer trends, wind reports from escorts, cloud height estimates, sea state notes passed from boat group commanders. He has spent months in North Africa watching dust haze and heat shimmer. Now he watches a different problem, a developing pattern over open water, a wind that builds seas faster than men expect. He begins with the tools of his trade, a synoptic chart marked by hand, a set of reports coming in at irregular intervals, a pressure change that does not look dramatic on a page, but matters when translated into wave height and breaking crests. He looks again at the timing, how long the landing craft must travel after they are lowered, how exposed they will be, how tightly scheduled the first waves are, how little margin exists once the lowering begins. He keeps his language careful. He knows the culture of an invasion staff. Every delay is suspected of becoming a lost opportunity. Every adjustment is suspected of becoming confusion. So he frames his forecast as a warning, not an argument. He writes that winds may remain high through the planned approach. He notes that the sea is likely to stay uncomfortable for small craft. He adds that conditions could worsen near the coast where shoals change the pattern of waves. He does not claim certainty. He does not use absolutes. He describes risk. His message goes forward through channels. It becomes one sheet among many, a line item beside fuel states, formation changes, and last-minute routing. And in a headquarters built to keep tempo, caution competes with momentum. The invasion is already moving. Thousands of men are already committed to the water. Equipment is already staged to go over ramps. Cables and lashings have been checked, tightened, checked again. If the armada slows now, it does not pause in place. It spreads out. It becomes harder to protect. It becomes harder to coordinate. Some planners fear that delay would invite air attack. Others fear that delay would expose the deception effort. Others simply fear that delay would look like weakness. There is also a quieter belief at work, the belief that the enemy will not expect an invasion in poor weather, that rough conditions might protect surprise, that discomfort is acceptable if it buys an easier landing against unready defenders. This is a seductive logic. It is also an incomplete one, because the sea does not only affect the enemy, it affects the craft carrying the first men in. In the hours before midnight, the force feels the difference. On some decks, the wind pushes smoke flat. On others, spray begins to reach places it should not reach. Small patrol craft and landing craft in tow take water over the bow. Men who have trained for months become quiet, not from fear of combat, from the practical awareness that the water itself may disrupt the plan. The weather officer watches the signals coming from smaller ships. Short messages, plain words. Rough for LCI. Difficult to keep station. Boats taking spray. He updates his notes. He calculates, not in the abstract but in the language the force understands. If seas remain as they are, lowering boats will be harder. If they build further, men will arrive late, wet, and scattered waves are a gift to coastal defences. He sends another update. It is not dramatic. It is the same caution, now supported by fresh reports. He advises wider spacing of waves. He suggests that boat groups be given authority to delay the final run if broaching becomes severe. He recommends that beach parties be prepared for mislandings. He knows these are not popular suggestions. They introduce flexibility where staff plans prefer precision. But he also knows the alternative, a schedule kept on paper while boats break apart in the dark. On the bridge, the senior officers are balancing many pressures. They are following orders that were agreed far above their level. They are managing formations in crowded sea lanes. They are preparing for the airborne part of the plan, which requires its own timing. They are listening for submarines and watching for aircraft. Weather is one variable among many, and because it is always present, it is often treated as background. The decision that night is not made with hostility toward forecasting. It is made with a priority, tempo. The invasion proceeds. The staff notes the warning, then returns to the schedule. For the weather officer, this is not unfamiliar. He has seen forecasts accepted, ignored, and reinterpreted. He knows that a cautious forecast can be heard as indecision. He also knows that if he overstates risk, he will be dismissed the next time. So he stays within his discipline. He continues to watch. He continues to report. He does what he can with the authority he has. As midnight passes, the first signs appear at the edge of control. Some landing craft fall behind their guides. It is not yet a crisis, but it is the beginning of drift. An invasion is not only a clash of armies, it is a choreography of timings and distances. When the sea adds minutes and miles, the choreography frays. Lowering operations begin. Davits swing. Engines start in confined spaces. Men step down ladders and into boats that rise and fall against the ship's side. Every impact risks injury. Every swing risks damage. Every delay crowds the schedule. The weather officer is not on the davits. He is not shouting orders over wind and water. His work is quieter. But he understands the physical problem better than most. A small craft in a short, steep sea does not simply ride over waves. It can slam. It can lose steerage. It can broach if the crest catches it at an angle. And when it does, men are thrown against steel, weapons are soaked, radios fail, and navigation becomes guesswork. Boat group commanders report difficulty forming up. They struggle to keep their lines. They lose visual references in spray and darkness. Some compasses are unreliable in small craft. Some coxswains depend on the wake of a guideboat. If the guideboat is delayed, the whole group becomes uncertain, and the beaches ahead are not marked like a training shore. They are real coastline in wartime darkness. The sea builds and then moderates in uneven pulses. There are moments when it seems manageable. Then a set of waves arrives that is not. This irregularity is what makes the problem hard to plan around. A steady rough sea can be managed with discipline. A variable one creates false confidence. As the force nears the coast, visibility improves in places. But improved visibility cuts both ways. It helps navigation. It also increases the risk of being seen. The weather officer watches the horizon and calculates again. If the wind shifts even slightly, smoke screens may not hold where planned. If the sea changes, craft will arrive out of sequence. The plan depends on sequence. Reports begin to include the cost of the conditions. Boats shipped water, troops soaked. Some men seasick before they ever see the shore. A landing in itself is exhausting. An exhausting landing under fire becomes dangerous. An exhausting landing scattered by weather becomes worse. On one transport, a boat group is late because patrol craft could not make their station on time. On another, a wave commander chooses to proceed without full control vessels present. This is a small, unofficial decision, not rebellion, a judgment made under pressure. And it is exactly the kind of decision that grows when weather eats the plan. The weather officer listens for these details. They are operational facts. They confirm his caution without needing drama. A forecast is not vindicated by words. It is vindicated by behaviour forced upon men by wind and water. Near the beaches, the sea state interacts with the shoreline. The last mile is often the hardest. Waves steepen. Sandbars break patterns. A craft that was stable offshore can become unstable in the surf zone. The landing craft meet what sailors call the wrong sea. Not merely rough, wrong in direction and shape for their approach. Wrong for ramp-down landings. Wrong for tight schedules. Some craft land early, some late, some off course. A portion of the assault arrives where it should not far enough to lose the operation, far enough to complicate it. Beach parties that were supposed to guide and mark are delayed or dispersed. Communication between boat groups and shore becomes intermittent. Radios that were already fragile in salt air become less reliable when drenched. In the midst of this, the weather officer makes a choice. It is not heroic. It is not cinematic. It is professional and quiet. He moves his report beyond routine channels. He asks that a brief direct message be sent to the boat group control. He repeats his earlier guidance in shorter, simpler form. He advises that the next waves be given wider spacing. He advises that control craft emphasize navigation over perfect alignment. He advises that commanders accept that some mislanding is inevitable and plan to regroup inland rather than fight the surf too long. This message is not guaranteed to be acted upon, but it reaches people who can use it, and in war, a warning delivered at the right level can matter more than a perfect forecast delivered to the wrong desk. For some boat groups, the adjustment is immediate. They slow slightly to keep craft from pounding themselves apart. They accept a less precise line to keep engines and steering functional. They use silhouettes of the coast and the sound of surf to confirm position. They arrive with less order than planned. They arrive with more intact boats than might have been the case. For others, the adjustment comes too late. They are already committed to a run. They are already in surf that pushes them sideways. They are already losing equipment to water. The sea does not listen to corrections once momentum has taken over. In the first hours ashore, the invasion shows its mixed character. Some sectors encounter light opposition and move inland. Others face strong points. But across sectors, one consistent problem remains: coordination. A plan designed for neat timing now operates on uneven arrivals. The consequences of weather are not always obvious in after-action summaries. Gunfire and casualties are obvious. Delays caused by waves are recorded but not always understood. A landing craft damaged by surf may be listed as mechanical failure. A unit arriving late may be blamed on navigation. A radio failure may be attributed to equipment quality. Weather is the hidden hand that influences all three. The weather officer does not claim credit. He does not have the temperament for it. He continues to update the staff as the day develops. He notes that the wind is easing in some areas and holding in others. He advises on the best windows for follow-on waves. He advises on smoke and visibility for naval gunfire. His work becomes more valuable after the first shock, when the force must sustain itself. But the institutional tension remains. Some officers interpret the rough approach as proof that surprise was worth discomfort. They point out that defenders were not fully alert. They argue that delay would have cost more. Others, closer to the boat deck, see different evidence. They see injured men who never met enemy fire. They see equipment lost to water. They see craft that cannot be reused quickly because they have been battered. They see the price paid in time and cohesion. By midday, the invasion has momentum of its own. The beachheads expand. Supplies begin to move. The sea remains an obstacle. But now it is one among many. The weather officer's role becomes less visible. His warnings are no longer urgent. They become routine again. Routine is where unsung work disappears. In the days that follow, staff officers compile reports. They list successes and shortcomings. They note unexpected sea conditions. They describe difficulties for landing craft and control vessels. They recommend improvements in boat handling, navigation aids, and command arrangements. And among these recommendations, a theme emerges: better weather information, better dissemination, better authority for those who must make decisions on the water. This is the quiet legacy of the weather officer. Not a medal that changes his career, not a line in a famous memoir, a shift in procedure, a recognition that the atmosphere and sea are not background. They are active participants in amphibious war. After the landings, the officer continues his work. He briefs commanders for follow-on operations. He helps refine how forecasts are turned into guidance. He pushes for standardized language about small craft risk. He advocates for closer liaison between meteorological sections and boat group commanders. He does it carefully. He has learned that institutions resist change when it is framed as blame. So he frames it as preparation, as prevention, as respect for the men who ride the first waves. There is also an internal correction that happens quietly. He reviews his own caution. He compares his forecast to what occurred. He notes where uncertainty was larger than he admitted. He notes where he could have been clearer. This is the discipline of the work, not drama. iteration. He becomes, in time, one of many officers who help mature amphibious forecasting. The lessons are absorbed into training. Boat crews learn to interpret sea state warnings, staffs learn to plan for dispersion, commanders learn that surprise gained through bad weather must be weighed against the loss of control it causes. The broader campaign moves on. Sicily falls. The war continues into Italy. New invasions are planned, rehearsed, adjusted. And in each, weather sections occupy the same modest spaces near charts and radios. They continue to do work that is essential and rarely celebrated. Years later, when the operation is remembered, the focus remains on generals and divisions, on the politics of strategy, on the movement of armies across maps. Less is said about the wind that pushed landing craft off course. Less is said about the small decisions made to keep waves from collapsing. Less is said about the officer who tried to translate caution into usable guidance. Yet the record of amphibious war is full of such moments. A forecast that was not dramatic enough to slow a schedule, a sea state that was wrong for the plan, a staff culture that treated tempo as protection, and a quiet professional who understood that tempo without control can become its own hazard. In the end, his contribution is measured in what did not happen, in boat groups that remained functional, in waves that arrived with enough cohesion to move inland, in commanders who later demanded better meteorological support before committing craft to open water. He is not remembered as a hero. He is remembered, when he is remembered at all, as competent, as careful, as persistent. And those are the qualities that keep large operations from breaking apart on small details. If you want more stories about the overlooked specialists behind major operations, consider subscribing and staying with the series.